Told you that the man who raised you, who built his whole life around you, could become invisible to you overnight. Stay with me, because this one's gonna sit with you long after it's over. Welcome back to Dad's Honest Revenge. Settle in, grab something warm, and remember, every person in this story had a chance to do the right thing. Some of them just didn't. Leave a comment, hit subscribe. You're gonna want to be here for this. My name is Edward Callahan. 14 months ago, I had a home, a business, and a daughter I would have walked through fire for. Today I have two of those things back, but not the ones you'd guess. Let me start from the place it all fell apart. I owned a small furniture restoration shop in Beaumont, Texas, for 27 years. Nothing fancy. No investors, no franchise. Just me, a couple of employees, and a workshop that smelled like walnut stain and sawdust from the moment I opened the doors in 1997. I refinished dining tables that families had been eating at for 3 generations. I rebuilt rocking chairs that grandmothers wouldn't let go of. I fixed things. That's what I did. That's who I was. My wife Carolyn died in 2019, pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel, the way that particular disease always is. She was 58. We'd been married 34 years. After she passed, the shop became everything. Not because I loved wood more than I loved her memory, but because when your hands are busy stripping old lacquer at 6 in the morning, your brain has less room to remind you that the other side of the bed is cold. Then came November 14th, 2024. I got a call from my accountant, a man named Dale who I trusted for 19 years, telling me that a tax lien had been filed against my business. Not a small one. $340,000 in back taxes that I supposedly owed going back 6 years. I told Dale that was impossible. I'd paid every quarter, on time, every single year. Dale said he'd look into it. 2 days later, my business bank account was frozen. 3 days after that, the IRS sent a formal notice of seizure. By the end of the week, a locksmith was changing the locks on my own shop while I stood on the sidewalk holding a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I was 63 years old. I had arthritis in both hands, a torn rotator cuff I'd been putting off surgery for, and suddenly I had nothing. No income, no savings I could touch, no shop. My house, which I'd put up as collateral on a business loan 8 years earlier because Dale told me it was a smart move, was now part of the seizure. 18 days. That's how long it took to go from Edward Callahan, small business owner, respected in his community, to Edward Callahan, man sitting in a Denny's parking lot at 11 p.m. trying to figure out where to sleep. But here's the thing that broke me. Not the money. Not the shop. Not even the house where Carolyn and I had raised our daughter and where I could still smell her perfume in the hallway closet if I pressed my face into her old winter coat. It was my daughter. Her name is Janine. Jenny I used to call her, back when she was small enough to ride on my shoulders to the Beaumont Farmers Market on Saturday mornings. She's 36 now. Lives in a big new build house in Katy with her husband Marcus and their 2 boys Caleb and Noah. 7 and 4. I helped them with the down payment on that house. I'm not saying that to score points. I'm saying it because it matters for what comes next. When everything collapsed, I called Jenny. Not right away. I waited 5 days because I didn't want to scare her. And honestly, part of me kept thinking it would get sorted out. That Dale would call and say it was a clerical error and we'd laugh about it later. Dale did not call. So on the 6th day, a Thursday, I drove to Katy. 2.5 hours on I-10 with everything I still owned in the trunk of my 2016 Camry. A suitcase, a box of Carolyn's photos, my tool roll, and a paper bag of clothes I'd grabbed before the house got locked up. I wasn't expecting a parade. I wasn't expecting Jenny to fix my life. I just needed a place to sit down, eat something that wasn't from a gas station, and think for more than 10 minutes, without panic crawling up the back of my throat. I knocked on the door at 6:15 in the evening. The porch light was on. I could hear the TV inside. Noah was laughing at something. That laugh, my grandson's laugh, that was the last normal sound I heard before everything tilted. Marcus opened the door. Not Jenny. Marcus. He was still in his work shirt, tie loosened, holding a dish towel like he'd been interrupted mid-task. He looked at me, then at the suitcase behind me, and his face did something I will never forget. It rearranged itself. That's the only way I can describe it. The surprise became calculation, became decision. All in about 2 seconds. Ed, he said. Not Dad. He'd never called me Dad, and I'd never pushed it. But in that moment, the name Ed landed like something deliberate. Hey, Marcus. Jenny home? She's putting Noah down. What's going on? I told him. Short version. Business gone. House gone. Need a few days. He listened with his arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe, not stepping aside, not inviting me in. The dish towel hung over his shoulder like a prop he'd forgotten about. That's rough, he said. That's really rough, Ed. Let me go talk to Jenny. He closed the door. Not all the way. Left it open about 4 inches like I was a delivery that hadn't been signed for yet. I stood on that porch for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the time on my phone. 11 minutes in November in Texas, which isn't cold the way Michigan is cold, but when you're 63 and tired and standing outside your own daughter's house waiting to find out if you're welcome, it feels like February. The door opened again. This time it was Jenny. My Jenny. She had her hair pulled back the way she always did in the evenings, and she was wearing Carolyn's old cardigan, the green one with the buttons. And the sight of it hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. Daddy, she said, and her eyes were wet, and for 1 second, one beautiful second, I thought it was going to be okay. Then she stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her. Daddy, I'm so sorry about what's happening. I really am. But Marcus and I talked about it, and right now isn't. It's just not a good time. The boys are in a routine, and Marcus has this big project at work, and we can't have the disruption right now. Disruption. That's the word my daughter used. I was a disruption. That's the word my daughter used. I was a disruption. Jenny, I just need a few days. A week, maybe. Just until I sort out what's happening with the IRS. She bit her lip. I watched her bite her lip, and I saw Carolyn in her face so clearly it almost made me dizzy. I know, Daddy. And I want to help. I do. Maybe I can send you some money? For a motel or something? I looked at her. I looked at this woman I had taught to ride a bicycle on Marigold Street. This woman whose science fair projects I had built in my workshop until midnight 3 years running. This woman who had cried on my shoulder the night Carolyn died and told me, "Don't worry, Daddy. I'll always take care of you. Just like you took care of us." A motel, I said. She started crying. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I picked up my suitcase. I kissed her on the forehead, the way I've kissed her goodnight since she was born, and I walked back to my car. She stood on the porch until I pulled away. I saw her in the rear-view mirror, standing under the porch light in her mother's cardigan, and I made a decision right then that I would not cry in front of a rear-view mirror at 63 years old. I waited until I got to the Walmart parking lot on Mason Road before I broke that decision entirely. Now, I need you to stay right here with me, because this is where the whole thing changes, and I promise you, it does not change the way you think it's going to. I spent 3 nights in that Walmart parking lot. Not proud of it, not ashamed of it, it just was. I moved my car to a different spot each morning so security wouldn't flag me. I brushed my teeth in the Walmart bathroom. I bought a rotisserie chicken on the second night and ate half of it in the driver's seat and put the other half in a cooler I'd grabbed from the clearance aisle. On the 4th morning, a Sunday, I woke up to a tapping on my window. My first thought, security guard. My second thought, cop. My third thought, when I opened my eyes and actually looked, was that the woman standing outside my car did not look like either of those things. She was maybe 55, dressed in a gray wool coat, hair pinned up neatly, carrying a leather folder under one arm. She had the kind of face that suggested she had smiled a great deal in her life but was not currently doing so. She tapped again. 2 short, patient taps, and waited. I rolled down the window. "Mr. Callahan," she said. That was the moment. Right there. Because nobody knew I was here. Nobody. "My name is Helen Marsh. I am the personal representative of Mr. Thomas Weatherly." She paused, the way someone pauses when they expect a name to mean something. It didn't. "Mr. Weatherly has asked me to extend an invitation to you this morning. He is aware of your circumstances and would very much like to speak with you in person." I looked at her. Then I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. 3 days of Walmart parking lot living had not done me any favors. "Ma'am," I said, "I don't know who Thomas Weatherly is. I don't know how you know my name. And I look like I'd been living in a car, which I have, so I'm going to need a little more information before I go anywhere with anyone." Helen Marsh looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as professionally compassionate, like she had been trained in delivering strange news to confused men in parking lots and had gotten very good at it. She reached into her leather folder and produced a small envelope. From it, she pulled a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery and read aloud. Tell Edward Callahan that the man who restores broken things for a living deserves to know why his life was broken, and by whom. The Walmart parking lot was waking up around us. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan 2 spots over. A crow was sitting on a shopping cart return rack, looking at me with what I can only describe as judgment. I followed Helen's car, a silver Lexus that made my Camry feel emotionally insufficient, for about an hour north on 290, past Hempstead, past the last of the strip malls and gas stations, until we turned onto a private road I would have driven past 100 times without noticing. The property at the end of that road was not a mansion. I want to be clear about that. It was a ranch house, but the kind of ranch house that had been quietly, expensively maintained for decades. The kind of place where everything looked simple until you realized the simplicity was the most expensive part. Helen led me through the front door into a wide, bright room with windows looking out over cattleland that stretched to the tree line. The room smelled like coffee and old wood and something faintly medicinal. Thomas Weatherly was sitting in a leather chair near the window. He was older than I expected, mid-80s at least, thin in the way that sickness makes people thin, not gracefully but persistently. He wore a flannel shirt, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, and he was holding a hardback book he'd clearly been reading before I arrived. He set it down when I walked in. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You look like you've been through it, Edward." "That's because I have been through it," I said. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, more like recognition. "Sit down." Helen made coffee. "It's better than whatever you've been drinking." She had 2 cups already poured on the table between the chairs. I sat. I drank. He was right. It was better. "I'll get right to it," Thomas said, "because I don't have the luxury of taking my time with things anymore." He gestured vaguely at his own body, acknowledging what was happening to it without dramatizing it. "I have a few months, maybe less. My doctors disagree with each other, which I take as a bad sign." "I'm sorry," I said, "because you say that, even to strangers." "Don't be. I've had 84 years, and most of them were good." He leaned forward slightly. "Edward, your accountant. Dale Hubbard. How long did you work with him?" The question caught me off guard. 19 years. "And you trusted him?" "Completely. He handled everything. Taxes, payroll, business filings. I built furniture. He handled the money." Thomas nodded slowly. "Dale Hubbard has been stealing from you for 11 years. If you've been listening this long, I need to ask you something real quick. That subscribe button, 98% of the people watching this never press it. But it's free. It takes 1 second. And it's how stories like this keep reaching people who need them." "Thank you. I mean that." The room didn't spin. The floor didn't drop out. It was more like the sound went off. Like someone had pressed mute on the world and I was sitting in perfect silence while those words rearranged everything I thought I knew. "He filed fraudulent tax returns in your name for 6 years, Thomas continued. His voice was calm, factual, the way a man speaks when he's had time to sit with information that would flatten most people. "He diverted funds from your business account into a series of shell entities he controlled. When the discrepancy became too large to hide, he triggered the IRS audit himself, anonymously. He timed it so the seizure would hit before you had any chance to investigate." "That's not," I started. My voice sounded far away. "The house," Thomas said. "The collateral arrangement on your business loan. That was Dale's recommendation, wasn't it?" I just stared at him. He structured it that way intentionally, 8 years in advance, so that when the seizure came, it would take the house too. Clean sweep, nothing left to stand on. My hands were on my knees. I pressed them down because they were shaking, and I didn't want this man, this stranger, to see them shake. "Why?" I said. "Dale's been to my house for Thanksgiving. He was at Carolyn's funeral. He held my hand at Carolyn's funeral and told me everything was going to be okay." Thomas picked up a manila folder from the side table. He held it out to me. I took it. I opened it. Bank statements, transfer records, corporate filings for companies I'd never heard of. Emails printed between Dale and people I didn't recognize, discussing timelines, asset thresholds, exposure windows. My name appeared on nearly every page. How do you have this? I asked. Because Dale Hubbard didn't just steal from you, Thomas said. He stole from me first. The clock on the wall behind Thomas ticked. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed softly. Helen, probably. Moving through rooms the way people move through rooms when someone else is having the worst conversation of their life. 22 years ago, Thomas said. Dale Hubbard was a junior accountant at a firm I used for my ranch operations. Smart kid. Careful. The kind of careful that you mistake for trustworthy because you don't realize there's a difference. He embezzled $1.6 million from my accounts over 3 years. Small amounts, well hidden, layered through enough entities that it took my forensic team the better part of a year to trace it all. What happened? I caught him. He was 34 years old, terrified, came to my house right here in this room, sat in that chair you're sitting in, and begged me not to press charges. Said he had a young family. Said he'd pay it back. Said it would never happen again. Thomas looked out the window at his Callahan. I let him go, he said. I believed him. I was wrong. He turned back to me. He went to Beaumont, changed firms, found you within a year. And for the next 19 years, he did to you what he'd done to me, only slower, more carefully, and much, much worse. And you knew, I said. My voice was steady now, steady in the way that a rope is steady right before it snaps. For how long? I found out 8 months ago. A former associate of mine flagged his name in connection with a separate investigation. When I pulled the thread, it led to you. 8 months. My business has been gone for 3 weeks. My house has been gone for 2. You had 8 months. Thomas held my gaze. He didn't flinch from it, and I'll give him that. I could have intervened sooner. I should have. The reason I didn't is not a reason you're going to like. Try me. I wanted to see what you would do. The silence that followed that sentence was heavy enough to have its own gravity. I spent my career, Thomas said slowly, building wealth that most people would consider obscene, and somewhere in the last decade, I started asking myself what any of it was for. I started watching people, not the way you watch a game, the way you watch weather. What do people do when everything falls apart? Who do they become? Do they become smaller? Or do they find something they didn't know they had? I'm not your experiment, Thomas. No, he said. You're not. And that's why I'm telling you this now instead of from behind a two-way mirror. I watched you lose everything. I watched your daughter turn you away. I watched you sleep in a Walmart parking lot for 3 nights. And every single morning you got up, you shaved in a public bathroom, and you sat in that car making phone calls to lawyers who wouldn't take your case, trying to fix it yourself. You didn't ask anyone for pity. You didn't post about it on the internet. You didn't go to Dale's house with a baseball bat, which frankly is what most people would have done, and what I might have done myself. I thought about the baseball bat, I said. But you didn't do it. No, I didn't do it. Thomas reached for his coffee. His hand trembled slightly, and he used both hands to steady the cup. He drank and set it down. Edward, I have no children. I have no family to speak of. I have this ranch, a portfolio that my attorneys manage, and about 4 months of lucid time left before my body finishes what it started. I need someone to manage the foundation I've spent the last 3 years building. It's funded. The structure is in place. What it doesn't have is a person at the center of it who knows what it actually feels like to be destroyed by someone you trusted. He pushed a second folder across the table. I opened it. Inside was a document with a name at the top, the Weatherly Restoration Fund. The foundation is capitalized at $18 million, Thomas said. Its sole purpose is to provide emergency financial intervention for small business owners who have been victims of fraud, embezzlement, or financial crimes. Legal support, forensic accounting, bridge funding to keep their businesses alive while cases are investigated. The kind of help that you needed 3 weeks ago and couldn't find. I read the first page, then the second. My hands were still shaking, but for a different reason now. Why me? I asked. You could hire anyone. You could hire a team of professionals who know how to run a foundation. I could. And they'd run it like professionals. Efficiently, competently. They'd hold quarterly meetings and generate annual reports, and none of them, not one, would know what it feels like to stand on a sidewalk watching a locksmith change the locks on the thing you built with your own hands. He leaned back in his chair. I don't need competence, Edward. I need someone who will look at every case file that crosses that desk and see a person, not a number. I need someone who will pick up the phone at 10 o'clock at night when a woman in Arkansas calls crying because her bookkeeper just cleaned out her bakery's accounts, and she doesn't know how she's going to make payroll on Friday. I need someone who understands, in their bones, that when a person loses everything to someone they trusted, the money is the smallest part of what was taken. The cattle outside the window moved slowly across the land, doing whatever cattle do on a Sunday morning when the world inside the house is being rearranged. And Dale, I said, my attorneys have compiled a complete forensic record of everything he did, to you and to me. The file has been prepared for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. It will be submitted Monday morning regardless of whether you accept the foundation position. Dale Hubbard is going to prison, Edward. That part is not conditional. I set the folder down. I picked it up again. I set it down again. I'm sure I looked ridiculous. There's one more thing, Thomas said. Of course there was. Your daughter, Janine. My whole body went still. What about her? Helen looked into your daughter's husband, Marcus Reed. His employer, Whitfield Pryor Financial Group, is one of Dale Hubbard's shell companies. I need you to understand what happened in my chest when he said that. It wasn't anger. Anger is too simple a word. Anger is too simple a word. Anger is a firecracker. This was tectonic. This was something shifting at the foundation level. Marcus works for Dale. Marcus has worked for a subsidiary of Dale's network for 4 years. We don't have evidence that Marcus knew about the embezzlement specifically. It's possible he didn't. But Dale is the reason Marcus has his job, his salary, and his lifestyle. His salary and his lifestyle. And when you showed up at your daughter's door, it was Dale's money paying for the house you weren't welcome in. I stood up. I walked to the window. The glass was cold against my forehead when I pressed it there. I stayed like that for a while. A minute. Maybe more. She doesn't know, I said finally. Jenny doesn't know. I don't believe she does know. She just thought it was bad timing. Most likely, yes. I turned around. I want to meet Dale. Thomas looked at me carefully. That's not something I'd recommend. I don't care what you'd recommend, Thomas. With respect. You watched me from a distance for 8 months. I'm asking you for one thing. Let me sit across from the man who did this to me before the FBI takes him. One conversation. That's all. Thomas studied me for a long time. Then he nodded. Helen will make the arrangement. The meeting happened 4 days later in a conference room at a law firm in Houston. Thomas's attorneys were present, 2 of them, seated against the wall like very expensive furniture. Helen stood near the door. Dale walked in. And here's the thing about seeing someone who has betrayed you completely. They look exactly the same. That's what gets you. You expect horns or a different face or some visible mark of what they've done. Dale looked like Dale. Same glasses, same careful haircut, same slightly nervous smile he'd always had, the one I used to think meant he was humble, but now understood meant he was calculating. He sat down across from me. He didn't know what the meeting was about. He'd been told it was regarding a client matter. Ed, he said, and he actually smiled. I've been trying to reach you. I heard about the IRS situation, and I want you to know I'm looking into it from my end. We're going to sort this out. I let him finish. I let every word land and dissolve. Then I pushed the folder, Thomas's folder, the one with the bank records and the shell companies and the emails, across the table. Open it, I said. He opened it. I watched his face. It did not rearrange the way Marcus's had. Marcus's face had moved fast, reorganizing on instinct. Dale's face strained, slowly, like watching paint thin in turpentine. The color just left. Ed, he started. Don't. I can explain. You can't. But I'm not here for an explanation. He looked up at me. For the first time in 19 years, I saw the real Dale Hubbard. Not the careful accountant, not the Thanksgiving guest, Not the man who held my hand at Carolyn's funeral. The real one, the one who had sat in the same kind of chair 22 years ago and begged Thomas Weatherly for mercy and gotten it, and learned nothing from it except that mercy was a weakness he could exploit. I'm here, I said, to tell you 3 things. First, this file goes to the FBI on Monday. That's not a negotiation. Second, every dollar you took from me is documented, and the foundation that Thomas Weatherly has established will use your case as its first public example of exactly what happens when someone like you targets someone like me. Dale's attorney, a man I hadn't noticed enter, leaned forward to speak. One of Thomas's attorneys raised a hand, one finger, and the man stopped. And third, I said. I leaned forward. I forgive you. Dale blinked. Not for your sake. I want to be clear about that. I forgive you because my wife is dead, and when she was alive, she would have told me that carrying this is heavier than anything you stole, and she would have been right because she was always right about the things that actually mattered. I stood up. Enjoy the rest of your week, Dale. Monday's going to be different. I walked out of that room and into a hallway where the air conditioning was too cold and the carpet was too thick and everything was very quiet. Helen was waiting by the elevator. How do you feel? She asked. Terrible, I said, but the right kind of terrible. Something almost like a smile crossed her face. 2 months later, I was sitting in an office at the Foundation's headquarters in Austin, second floor of a restored building on Congress Avenue, which I chose specifically because the building itself had been abandoned for 12 years before someone saw what it could be and brought it back. That felt right. My phone rang. It was Jenny. I hadn't called her. I hadn't told her about the Foundation, about Thomas, about Dale, about any of it. I'd thought about calling 100 times and decided each time that she needed to find certain things out on her own. She needed to understand what her life had been sitting on top of. Daddy, she said. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been crying for a while, and had stopped and was now in that raw, quiet place afterward. Hey, sweetheart. I know about Dale. Marcus told me everything. About the company, about where the money came from. Daddy, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. When you came to the house that night and when I said she couldn't finish. I know what you said, Jenny. I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry. If I had known, if I had any idea, I would have, Daddy. I would have brought you inside. You know that, right? You have to know that. I closed my eyes. Outside my window, Congress Avenue was doing what it does at 4 in the afternoon. People walking, cars moving, somebody playing guitar on the corner badly but with great enthusiasm. Jenny, I said, I love you. That hasn't changed and it won't. But I need you to hear something. Okay. You didn't turn me away because of Dale. You turned me away because it was easier than letting me in. And I need you to sit with that for a while. Not because I want to punish you. Because I want you to understand it so it never happens again. Not to me. Not to your boys when they're grown and they come to your door needing something. Silence. Long silence. The kind that is wait. Okay, Daddy, she whispered. Okay. I'll see you at Christmas, I said. Bring the boys. I have a yard now. I hung up. I sat there for a while in the late afternoon light. Thomas Weatherly passed away 7 weeks after our first meeting. Helen called me on a Tuesday morning. I drove out to the ranch and sat in his leather chair by the window. The book he'd been reading when I first met him was still on the side table, a bookmark 3/4 of the way through. He never finished it. I thought about a man in a flannel shirt who had let a thief go free 22 years ago and spent the rest of his life trying to make that mistake mean something. I thought about mercy, how it can be the bravest thing you do or the most dangerous, and how sometimes it's both at the same time. I closed the book and put it back on the shelf. Dale Hubbard was indicted on 14 counts of federal fraud 3 months later. His trial is pending. I don't follow it. That's not my story anymore. Marcus left Whitfield Pryor the week the indictments came down. He got a job at a smaller firm in Katy. He makes less money. He seems lighter, honestly. Lighter in the way people get when the thing they were pretending not to know finally comes out in the open. He and I are not close. We may never be. But last month he called me to ask my advice about refinishing a dresser he'd bought at an estate sale, and I talked him through it for 40 minutes. And neither of us mentioned anything else. The foundation opened its first case the same month Thomas died. A woman in Little Rock, 54 years old, ran a catering business for 16 years. Her business manager had siphoned off everything. She was 3 days from losing her commercial kitchen. We caught it. She's still open. She sent me a photo of a wedding cake she made last week with a note that said, "This one's because somebody answered the phone." I keep that note on my desk. If you've been with me this whole time, thank you. If this story hit close to home, I want you to know something. The worst Tuesday of your life is not the last page. It's not even the last chapter. It's the moment right before the story decides what it's actually about. And if nobody has told you this lately, you are not a disruption. You are someone's reason to answer the phone. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.